System Health and Environmental Resource Center. She's over that.
Make up that name. I'm sorry.
And we've invited her down to talk to us about our annual safety requirement that we have to meet here at the college. And so she's going to speak on the new HAZCOM training, which is hazard communication for the campus here. So hopefully we'll have an hour to spend today, and we're going to cover a lot of material. There's a little quiz there. I'm sure everyone's thrilled. But we'll go over that today at the end, so don't stress out about that. And if you'll just leave that quiz on the white table where the sign-in sheet is, that would be great. And that way we'll put that in the safety file. And without further ado, Ms. Pamela Boatwright.
Thank you, Evan. I appreciate it. Okay, hopefully everybody got the set of 3 handouts. If anybody needs anything, just wave at us. We also have a few extra pens if you don't happen to have something to write with. I will make the presentation available to Evan as well as the handouts electronically if he wants to share those with anyone later. So if this happens to come up, but we'll be doing another session this afternoon. We're getting started a little bit late, but I promise I'll get through this in about an hour. So apologies on that. As soon as I finish, I'll try to hurry up as soon as I finish. We have one announcement to make, and then you'll be done. So that's my title. I've been with the State Regents for 11 years now with assisting the public colleges and universities with health and safety compliance. I've also been involved with emergency response and also have had for about 2.5 years now a grant with the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health for suicide prevention. I have something called QPR trainers who do a little 1-hour suicide awareness class for everyone to understand how to talk to someone who might be threatening their life. So that's been a real challenge working with Department of Mental Health, but that's been a really rewarding program too. So you just never know. It's a varied job. The topic today is hazard communication. It's one of those things that is not terribly exciting. The only thing exciting about it is I was doing this for Tulsa Community College middle of October and was fighting this horrible respiratory thing. About 45 minutes in, I started feeling funny. Next thing I know, there's 4 people looking at me from laying on the floor. First time, I didn't know what it was like to pass out. That was a mess trying to drive home from Tulsa, but I made it. But that was about the only thing exciting about hazard communication. Now, you all know the building where we are. We're obviously not going to have severe weather today, but in case of a fire, we go to the nearest exit, and I say we rally on the west side. We'll take the sign-in sheets to make sure everybody got out okay. And more as a reminder for me than anybody else, I know everybody has their phones. It's kind of our lifelines anymore, but if you don't mind putting that on vibrate or silent, that would be great. And I know we kind of have a big group here today, but I kind of hate to have people save their questions. So if a burning question comes up, please just go ahead and speak up for me, and then I'll repeat the question because they are taping this today for people who were not able to make it in. But just ask your questions as you go along, please, because that way we'll be sure to get them answered. Hazard communication. I'm not just going to cover the brand new stuff because it may have been a while or some of you may be new. I do want to cover some of the general requirements, the new program requirements, and then we'll do a review, and I promise a very easy quiz at the end. Just so you will all know, can I see by raising hands maybe who's been through hazard communication lately within the last... Okay, I don't see a lot of hands. A few are up. It is something that the state of Oklahoma adopted that we have to do annually. Just as a quick review, in 1970, the federal government created the U.S. Department of Labor. The rule that created them, the act that created them, exempts public employees. So the federal OSHA inspectors never show up on public campuses, but what happens is that in 1970, the Oklahoma legislature created the Oklahoma Department of Labor, and they have a division called the Public Employees Occupational Safety and Health Division, or POSH. So some of you may have been getting training from Greg Hogan down at the Stillwater campus. I know he comes up occasionally and does things for physical plant. You may be aware of them, but we have adopted in the state of Oklahoma all the federal rules. They wrote them all in two groups called 1910, which is general industry, and 1926 for construction, because a lot of our physical plant people do construction-related activities, and there are rules in there for them. They made three things more stringent. One is that HAZCOM, per the feds, has to be once or if the job changes. For us, we have to train on HAZCOM annually, in case you wonder why we say that. You do have a policy, which I want to just point some things out here on about shortly, and it does say that all employees will do hazard communication annually, so that's part of your campus policy. And basically the intent is employee health and safety when it comes to chemical use in the workplace. You know, it's not just general health and safety for everything, but it's specifically for chemicals. And there are so many chemicals in the workplace, really, who's not exposed to a chemical now and then? And I don't mean exposed, you get overexposed, but who doesn't use chemicals? So many people do. So it could be a health or a physical hazard, and I'll go ahead and explain that here in just a second. Okay, I've already mentioned this. In case you hadn't heard, just so you've all got the same background, there's something called the Code of Federal Regulations. There's 50 of them altogether. And different agencies have their rules in these codes of federal regulations, or CFRs. And 29 CFR is OSHA, if you ever see that, just so you'll know. Now, a couple others you might have heard of, DOT, Department of Transportation. They regulate the railways, the shipping, the trucks going up and down the highway. They're 49, and you don't have to remember all these numbers. But OSHA's 29. EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, they're 40. So you see there's 50 of them altogether. So that's what that is. And they're numbered. Hazard communication is number 1200. So that's just what that is, and that we have to do it annually because of the Oklahoma Department of Labor. The other thing they made more stringent is that they say we have to offer quarterly safety training, a variety of quarterly safety training to employees. And the other thing they made more stringent was an airborne standard for something called asbestos, which some of you may have heard of. We have to control that in the workplace pretty tightly, and there's an airborne standard in Oklahoma that's 10 times more stringent than the federal standard. So that's what the Oklahoma Department of Labor did. And I know you can't see this very closely, but this is what it looks like. It's PEOSH is the name of that group. They do collect injury and illness data from public employers, which is going in about now. And they generally will show up and do inspections if there's more injuries than they feel is the average rate. Although they could show up at any time, just like federal OSHA, they can do inspections. They offer all sorts of safety and health programs. If you ever want to see what the state offers, just as guidance, they have a web page for that, and I know much of that is small print, but anything from trenching to bloodborne pathogens for collateral jobs, hearing conservation, there's just a variety of things that they do offer. There's many resources out there that you can go to find health and safety information nowadays. In Oklahoma, just to reinforce, the rule in Oklahoma does say that we have to train annually. The federal rule says that we have to train on initial assignment and if the work changes. Another situation where you may want to retrain if you're a supervisor, if somebody's clearly not doing their job properly, if they're not handling their chemicals properly, maybe they're leaving things open, they're storing them improperly, you may need to do some retraining as a supervisor or department head. And generally, we don't cover every single material safety data sheet during every training. We can cover them by categories, by job. We don't have to sit down and read every single MSDS every year. Now, this is the U.S. Department of Labor webpage. This particular one is just a screenshot of the hazard communication page that has a whole variety of helpful information on it in case you want to get a better look or go into more depth about some of the pictograms that are changing or some of the labeling that's changing. This explains all of their resources that they have available. This is all based on something called the Globally Harmonized System, or GHS, if you ever hear that acronym. This basically is supposed to be Europe, Canada, North America. This really is supposed to be a global way to harmonize hazard communication, labeling, and pictograms and material safety data sheets. It's going to get us all on the same terminology, and hopefully our material safety data sheets are going to be looking a whole lot better when they get converted over to the new system. It's a very long document. I know you can't see the screenshot. It's 568 pages, but it's not that difficult. There are two major changes we're going to cover today very quickly. Some things aren't included, but I want to mention them anyway. Specifically in the regulation, exempted are pesticides and hazardous waste. Now, those are covered by Environmental Protection Agency. Anything you have at your desk that you just use for your own personal use or a prescription or over-the-counter drug, that's not something we have to even be concerned with. They specifically exempted beverage alcohols, but not that we have those here. But I want to talk about consumer products. Now, if you bring a consumer product to work, and by consumer product, I think of Windex or WD-40. Or some other similar thing you can buy at your local friendly convenience store or Walmart. If I, for example, use Windex at home, I might use it once a day or twice a day. If I use it at work, I'm probably using it 5, 6, 8, 10 times a day. I use it differently at work than I use it differently at home. And if you use that as part of your job, then it should be included in our program, and it should be inventoried, and we should have a material safety data sheet on it. And yes, there are MSDSs for Windex and WD-40 of all things. And one time I saw one for a Sharpie, but seriously. But I'm not saying collect MSDS for Sharpies, but they're out there for these consumer products. So if you use it at work differently than you do at home, we have to inventory it, and we have to have an MSDS. Now, we're a little bit behind schedule, but that's okay. Our heart is in the right place. We really were supposed to pass along this new information before December 1st, but just with scheduling on a lot of the schools, we're not making that. I just got finished with Okmulgee right before the Christmas break. But the thing I put up here about this is that by June 1st, 2016, the goal is to have all of our new safety data sheets in to replace our old material safety data sheets, and to have our labeling all changed over, and to have our inventories updated by then. So that's the regulatory time frame. And really nothing much changes. This is HAZCOM before GHS. We have to have a written program, which you do. There are a few things in there I'm going to point out here in a second. Each chemical in the workplace has to be labeled appropriately, and I'll list those 4 things that you have to have if you don't have a manufacturer label on them. We have to have an MSDS and now a safety data sheet for every hazardous chemicals, and we have to train. So again, the federal rule is initially, and if there's a change, but we also have to train if somebody is struggling with their job. So just don't forget about that. And we have to do it annually. A couple other changes, which I've already said, SDS instead of MSDS. And we used to say hazard determination, but now they're calling it classification. And now the labels all have very specific formats and things they have to have on them. Now, is anybody here from a laboratory, say an academic type lab of some kind? Okay, chemistry, biology, even nursing might have lab chemicals, or fine arts even, plenty of chemicals there. Specifically in 1200, they do talk about laboratories and the rules there. And you're also mentioned in your HAZCOM program, but you have to maintain material safety data sheets. You have to make sure things are labeled. and that your safety data sheets are accessible to your employees in your department. Now, it is employees, it's not students. This is applicable to students, and if the student's an employee, of course, it would be applicable to them. But the training really covers it today, although you probably have your own written laboratory safety program. So that really takes the place of the HAZCOM program. Much of what's in lab safety programs is usually covered in the HAZCOM program anyway, but in more detail in some cases. So shipping and receiving, does anybody here from shipping and receiving today where you get in shipments with chemicals for other departments? No? Well, they're covered too if you happen to see somebody. They have to make sure the containers aren't open and they don't deface the labels. If there's a safety data sheet in there, they have to make sure they find it and get it to the appropriate location. And they do also have to be trained. Supposedly, they don't need to know where the written program is, but really everyone should know where to find that. And I'm going to have to defer to Evan very quickly. If they do have the right to review your written program, although it does look like it's going to need a few updates with the new rules, so it's going to be changing. But if they want a copy of that, can they email you?
Sure, myself or Steve Grimes.
They can email Steve Grimes or Evan Dewsbury in HR. I suppose you all know him, hopefully. So I tried to find it on the website, but I poked around a little bit, but I didn't find it linked anywhere handy. So please feel free to email him if you would like a copy. Because we do have to have it written. We're going to have to talk about the classifications, labeling safety data sheets. There's a little bit I'm going to hit you on here first, just a little about employee information and training, because one of the prime points of this is you do have to have access. You have the right to access your records, and I want to make sure everybody understands about injury and illness reporting. So according to PIOSH, training is within 30 days, if I haven't said that already. There should be some kind of quick orientation to new employees within 30 days or so they know where to find the information, at least annually, whenever there are changes or if someone lacks knowledge. And I know, again, that's kind of a repeat, but those are your 4 instances here in Oklahoma where we do have to train. There is something also, I've usually mentioned it at the first. I'm going to backtrack just a little bit. In case you're wondering about OSHA rules and PIOSH rules, there is something in the original act that created OSHA that's called a general duty clause that says an employer is obligated to provide a workplace that's free of recognized hazards that could cause death or serious physical harm, even if OSHA doesn't have a rule on it. Because, the one big example that we can all relate to is heat stroke. OSHA does not have a rule on heat stroke. They do have plenty of guidance, but it's up to us for recognized hazards, even if OSHA doesn't have a rule. And you know how slow government works. It's just the fact of life. We are obligated to evaluate our own workplaces and provide that workplace. So we are going to cover your policy and program briefly. I know every department hears a little bit differently, and not all of you might have safety data sheets, but you should be able to know where to find those or who to call if you have questions and how to use that information. Some of this I can tell you today, but much of this is going to fall back on supervisors who have work-specific procedures and inventories that I don't know anything about. Supervisors do carry that burden to train to their department level that is needed for their employees. So there's something called a chemical inventory list, or CIL, that I'm going to just go through briefly here again in a minute. And you also have to just tell anybody any special precautions they might have in your workplace. I can't imagine what all those might be, and if I tried to even think of a few, I'm sure I would miss them. So training has to include how to detect the release of a hazardous chemical, if there's a special warning, if there's a smell, you know, hey, if this yellow chemical leaks, this is what it is. It's going to smell this way. What do you do if you see a leak or a spill? How to detect and what to do with it in emergency. Physical and health hazards of what they're used and what they need to protect. So work practices, if you have specific work practices in your department, ways to shelve and categorize chemicals and use them. You need to train on that. Any emergency procedures, and if you're employees or you are assigned personal protective equipment to work with chemicals, the training needs to include that at some point during the year. Now, when we're talking about warning, this was an example that I found in my building, just for IT folks. I know we have a couple of you in here today. This is one of our server rooms. This is a way to detect a release of a hazardous chemical. If, in case of a fire, this FM200 is discharged into this room, it's a non-flammable gas that shoves out all the oxygen, so the fire goes out and it protects the computer equipment. And the strobe up there will go off. So our IT people all know if that strobe is going off, do not go into that room. So that's one thing that we have to make sure all the new people who come in know. You can do it by specific chemical, or you can do it by category if you want. We don't have to retrain on every single hazard every year for people who've been there forever. So it's all department specific. We just want to make sure they understand the label, the SDSs, what to do in case they're injured, how to report injuries. That's very important. We have to maintain these readily accessible is the legal terminology for how we have to retain our records for employees, especially material safety data sheets and safety data sheets. Readily accessible means they can't be in the book that's in the supervisor's office and you have to go knock on the door to ask permission to look at it. It should be, the MSDS's, SDS's should be available at any time for anyone to look at. I mean, a new employee may not want to go tell the supervisor, hey, I forgot what you told me, I need to look at that SDS again. So they have to be readily accessible. Even if they're electronic, that's okay, but there shouldn't be any barriers like asking for permission to use a particular computer. If you want a copy of the written program that's written into the rule, you can request a written copy. You can also get copies. Some of you, I seriously doubt that one or two of you have ever been exposed, officially exposed, and need medical attention at work. But if you ever had to have medical evaluation because of an exposure to a chemical, you should have all of your records on that too. Long time ago, when I worked for the Health Sciences Center, I used to have my asbestos license, so I would go around and sample building materials in ahead of physical plants, so we would know they didn't have asbestos in them. And so I had to go in once a year for a physical evaluation, and I got copies of all my records. And the same thing with anybody who's being given a medical evaluation at work due to a hazardous chemical or substance. So you have the right to those records. Any biological monitoring you have, any blood tests, any medical tests you have, inventory, just whatever is pertinent. The employees have the right to all of that information. If they request copies, we have 15 days to get them copies. But in this electronic age, that shouldn't be a problem, surely. Just want to make sure everybody knows that injuries and illnesses, even something if it seems small, to please report that. The intent is not to place blame or say, okay, what did you do wrong? Not that. We really need to find out what's going on with all the campuses. We're all this way. We need to find out what happened and fix the problem, not find blame. But no matter how small it is, please report injuries, because it may seem small, but by the next day, it could be a problem in some instances. So please report those. We do have to maintain records of any exposure or injuries. Those have to be reported to OSHA. And of course, we have our compensation system, which requires certain records too. And the intent there is to get people the help they need. So we just recommend that if somebody ever is injured, to be sure to help coordinate treatment. Don't let them go off driving by themselves to the hospital if you can avoid that at all. But do try to encourage injury reporting, because the intent is to find out what went wrong. Do be sure to find out what the chemical was, what the problem might be, the date of the reported exposures, if anything. We have to store those. Basically, I have 40 years, but it's really 40 years past employment. I mean, I should just cross that out and put forever there. We do, whether they're imaged or whatever, but we do have to store those forever. And, you know, latency periods, there could be a time lag between, you know, I mentioned asbestos, the latency period on that before health effects might show up could be anywhere from 10 to 40 years. So we have to keep them forever. This is all in the rule, and then we have to either give that to the person regularly, like I got my records regularly, or give them on their termination. So we have the written program. It outlines the responsibilities, the who and when does what. If there's anything non-routine, should probably be listed in here, and how you're going to inform your employees. And I'm not going to read the whole thing here to you, but every department who has chemicals and should be doing an inventory, I'm sure should have a copy of your written program. Probably, even though it needs to be updated, I would probably recommend you go ahead and get a copy of that if you don't have one already, just so you'll know who's responsible for what. And not only does federal OSHA, but POSH likes us to have someone read through those annually, just to make sure we haven't missed anything and that there aren't any changes. Now, there's a couple things in here I do want to point out. Some of you probably have never seen this. And the first section is, you know, that it recognizes that workplaces have all sorts of chemicals in them. And that it says, any OA&M recognize that employees have the right and the need to know the properties and potential safety and health problems of substances to which they may be exposed. And it does name a couple of people by title who are responsible. There is, the next section in here says updates of the chemical inventory list should begin July, and that those should be provided to the master record keeper by August. Now, again, title here, I'm not sure who that is, but I'm sure you'll, like I said, this policy is going to be updated slightly, so if you haven't done an inventory, I'd have a discussion with either Evan or Steve about the inventory list. If you have chemicals that need to be inventoried, those should be done in July according to your policy. And each building shall have a chemical inventory list. It says department heads must assure that MSDSs for all hazardous substances are obtained, and that a copy has to be kept in the department and readily accessible. Purchase orders should specify if an MSDS is needed. Now, as far as signs and labeling goes, I'll just scoot through that slide when I get to it, but your policy says that if it doesn't have a manufacturer's label on it, that your chemicals have to be labeled with. It says it is the responsibility of department heads to assure that each container of a hazardous substance is marked, labeled, or tagged with the common or trade name, appropriate hazard warning, like irritant, health, flammable, any personal protective equipment, like a glove or eye protection, and the fourth thing is the CAS number, or Chemical Abstract Services number. And I'll show where you find that if you're not familiar with that term, but every chemical, you know, some of the alcohols like have about 5 or 6 names, like ethanol or ethyl alcohol, or I think it has at least half a dozen other names. There's one CAS number for ethyl alcohol. So it's easier to track it by its CAS number than by its name, which could be different. So that is in there, and we require outside contractors to comply with our rules. They can't just do anything they want. It does talk about laboratories in section 4.02. And the department head or designee shall be responsible for providing the following to all department areas having contact with hazardous substances: the chemical name, the correct labeling, the availability of any MSDS, and training on specific work practices, protective measures, and emergency procedures. So kind of puts it back on all of your supervisors and department heads. And your policy says everyone shall have training, including temporary, work study, part-time, graduate assistants, teaching assistants, and full-time. So 6.03 is, again, a little bit more about department supervisors, just basically their work procedures, the chemical inventory list. So, and the storing for 40 years is also in here. So it's all in there, and I can review that with you, but as far as what's in your department, I'm going to have to ask you to do more work. So the CIL is for your area, and it's kept in a master record for the building. All copies should go to the safety coordinator, the master record keeper, which for now I'm going to assume is either you or Steve?
Steve on the MSDS.
Okay, Steve Grimes is going to be the master record keeper. If you do have any significant inventory changes for your area, you were using a quart of something and then all of a sudden you're going to use 15 gallons, it should be updated within about 15 days, 15 to 30 days, instead of just waiting for the next year. If you completely do away with the small container, just scratch it off and update it next year. But if you have significant changes, please report those too. Now, there's something new called hazard classification, and with the new rule, the update to the HAZCOM, they have a bunch of appendices in here that the manufacturers and suppliers are going to start using to help determine the new labels and the new material safety data sheets. I haven't read these. The way my computer was set up, the health hazard criteria is 27 pages. Physical hazard criteria is 9 pages. Label, 24, for heaven's sakes. And I'm not going to go over those, but the manufacturers and suppliers have to use those criteria to develop the new safety data sheets and the new labeling. There's Appendix F for carcinogens. Luckily, that's fairly straightforward. It's only 4 pages. There are 3 categories. Okay, I mentioned physical and health hazards. There's also an environmental hazard, but if it's environmental hazard, it's probably a health hazard to us anyway. Physical, what do I mean by that? I mean it can catch on fire, it can explode, it can blow up, it's not physical to my body, but it's a physical hazard is the term that you will see on that. Something that's going to react with itself, catch itself on fire. Any kind of oxidizer, which is a chemical with extra oxygen in it, it could help a fire burn hotter and faster. They consider that a physical hazard. Something that's going to self-heat, if it gets wet, the oily rags that are not enclosed could self-heat and catch on fire, for example. Now, the health hazards are broken down into several categories. Acute, you probably all heard that term, but acute means usually a very pronounced, quick response to a chemical. It's a short-term, obvious response. It could be something that's going to be harmful to the skin, either skin or eyes corrode or damage either permanently, or it might be reversible, something that's a respiratory sensitizer or skin sensitizer. Some of the isocyanate paints and epoxy paints used by physical plant are sensitizers in that they could be exposed to them for a while at the legal limit, but your body becomes extra sensitive. You probably all heard about formaldehyde. That's a famous sensitizer where you can be exposed at the regulatory limit, but you become extra sensitive to it. Skin, nickel. Have you ever know anybody who breaks out because of nickel? Nickel is a sensitization. Any mutations or cancer are the health hazards that are mentioned in GHS. anything dealing with the reproductive or birth mutations or teratogens, effects on that. Either a target organ is whatever organ that chemical affects, whether it's heart, liver, kidneys, or whatever it happens to be, or if someone breathes something in, that's called aspiration toxicity. So environmental hazards are listed. Basically, it can either accumulate in the food chain. It's usually a toxic to fish is the way that's looked at in GHS. Now here's an example of the new label, and we're about 75% of the way done, but looks like I'm good on time so far. I know this is also on your handout, but you will see, okay, I'm not going to walk around here. I keep forgetting about the camera. This is what a label is going to have. And I'll list these again here in a second, but it has to have the product identifier, either a code, a product name, something that identifies this particular product. The supplier information must contain an emergency phone number. And a lot of them have had that in the past on the SDS, on the MSDS, but this has to be on the label. Over here on this side are the new things called pictograms, and we'll review each of those briefly. There's also a signal word, and there's two signal words, danger and warning, and the hazard statement has to be there, which basically in this case is highly flammable, may cause liver or kidney damage. So those are the target organs. And you will see also precautionary statements. What precautions do you take? That's pretty straightforward. First aid in case of fire. And they can also put supplemental information on here if they want to. But the required elements are that product identifier, the chemical identity, signal words, hazard statement, the pictograms, and the precautionary information. And those 3 stars have to all be together somewhere on the label. So danger, just remember that's the more severe warning, more severe effects. And warning is still important, but it is probably somewhat less severe. And it's just used to indicate the relative hazard. So the hazard statement, again, they're not going to probably be as many as the precautionary statements, but it's just going to describe what the problem is. And there's a few other examples. Mayform peroxides, some lab chemicals are bad about that. The pictograms are standardized. They're going to be on your label and your new SDSs. They're specific to the categories. There's 9 of them. Precautionary statements, we've really covered these. Store well ventilated, keep tightly closed, pretty typical. There it is again. Does anybody have any questions? Any comments, any thoughts on that? All right, nobody's waving at me. There's one thing I want to mention. I need to point out the difference to you. And I didn't have a chance to look around very much, but are any of your buildings labeled with these triangles? You don't have any of them. You might have seen these on certain businesses or manufacturers. If you don't have them here, then if you do see them and were ever wondering, this information is going to probably also be on your SDS somewhere. So I want to go ahead and mention it. This is a triangle that's on the outside of buildings that the fire department requests you to put on there. Usually it's for larger quantities of chemicals that they're concerned about, and this is for fire department and EMS for large emergencies, emergency response, fire, big disasters. It does nothing for us to tell us on a day-to-day basis what's in that building and our daily exposure. This is strictly for fire department, EMS, emergency response. It can tell you the numbers go from 0 to 4. 0 is not a problem, and 4 is highly flammable, for example. Health, 0, ordinary material, or 4, too dangerous to enter, vapor, or liquid. So you can see for them, if they have enough of this in the building, they'll ask a manufacturer or a building to placard, so they will understand what they're looking at in that building. At the bottom precaution is, the W with the line through it is so they don't put water on the fire. If there's a fire there and something that water wouldn't help with, there's some other special designations down there. But it goes from 0 to 4. The problem is that is just opposite of HAZCOM. The new numbering system in HAZCOM is completely different. And again, HAZCOM 2013, day-to-day, normal, foreseeable use of chemicals, NFPA, just in a fire or emergency. And we've already covered this. OX, or oxidizers, if there's enough of those in there that the fire department needs to worry about, that'll sometimes be on the triangle. And SA, simple asphyxiant, that's like that FN200 that comes into the computer room. That basically means it pushes out all the oxygen, and if you walked in, you'd die because there's no air. It will just asphyxiate you because no oxygen is present. So SA might be listed on an NFPA triangle. So here's the difference in the numbers. NFPA 0 to 4. No hazard up to most hazardous. And HAZCOM, there'll be numbers in section 2 of the new SDS, and I know it's small print, but it's a good 2-page example, so I didn't have to give you 6 pages of something. That it's actually listed, there's some numbers listed on your example SDS that I have you. But 1 is the most severe, and 4 is the least severe. So just the opposite. The numbers aren't going to be on your label. There's also going to be categorical letters on some of your SDSs. It will generally go from A to being the most severe to G, the least severe. So if I had something listed A, if I have a 1A, I know that's pretty bad for HAZCOM safety data sheets. And I apologize, that should say HAZCOM 2013 safety data sheets, not labels, because the numbering system will not be on your labels. Carcinogens. This is one example that people wonder about. They're still out there in the workplace. They're in products in the workplace. And the example on carcinogens in the alphabetical classification, A is a known human carcinogen, B is presumed, and 3 is suspected, probably because of animal data or other data. We think it would probably be a carcinogen, but we're not sure. So you might see an SDS for something with a carcinogen in it that might have it labeled a 2A or a 1A. So, and there aren't that many known human carcinogens. Asbestos is one of them. So it might be a 1A. And there's that triangle again, just if anybody has any questions on that. One other thing you're going to see out there that you might wonder about is this does not harmonize the DOT rules. They have placarding and labeling that's also required. Your shipping and receiving people are going to have to serve 2 masters here, it looks like. But you will still see these DOT labels coming in on things, perhaps on boxes that FedEx or UPS brings. You'll also see them on the tracks running up and down the road and on the rail cars. Those are not changing. What is done by those is that the emergency responders, again, have something called the Emergency Response Guide. This is my old version. There's a new one out. But all of their numbers and labeling are in a guide for emergency responders, again, on how to respond to things like railroad crashes or truck crashes. And this is, too, nowadays all available online. So many of them just access it on their computers when they show up on site. Okay, pictograms, and we're just about done here. We started at 10 after, so I'm sure we still have 20 minutes, but I don't think it'll take that long. The skull and crossbones, the new pictograms, there's 9 of them. This is probably the worst one, and I put it up front. It's the most obvious to me. They haven't changed it, thankfully. I think we all know what that is. It will always have a danger designation. Either danger or warning, it will always be danger. And that is something that's acute, either fatal or extremely toxic. This next one's a little weird, and I had to think about it a while, but there's, something going on inside. It's some kind of an internal thing, a cancer, some kind of mutation, reproductive or target organ of some kind. Something that's going to be a respiratory irritant or not just an irritant, but a sensitizer could be labeled with this. So something that's going to be perhaps breathed in or affect one or more of our organs. That could be danger or warning, depending on the chemical. So it could very well show up as danger. The exclamation mark is going to show up as warning. This is more when you'll have an irritant of some kind. A skin sensitizer might be here. It's going to still be acute hazard, but more harmful than toxic. It could be a lot of solvents actually have narcotic effects. Some people abuse spray paints because of the solvents in there that get them high. Something irritating to the respiratory tract. Ozone layer could have that on there, although that's not mandatory. So we have to worry about it, but this is a little bit less severe than the others. That one's pretty obvious. There's something corroding the metal or the person's hand. This could be danger or warning, depending on if it's going to be a permanent effect or a reversible effect. The flame over, that's a circle. That's an O for oxidizer. Anything with extra oxygen in it could make a fire burn a lot faster and a lot hotter. So oxidizers will have that flame with an O on it. And just flammables, pretty straightforward here. This is going to show up. This could be danger or warning, depending on how flammable that is and how it's going to be reacting. Gas cylinders, again, physical hazard. Those things can fail and explode and go off like little missiles sometimes. Gas cylinders under pressure will show up as warning. And an exploding bomb, again, thankfully fairly straightforward. This might show up on some of your new materials. That's either it's going to explode, react with itself, and some organic peroxides might be on there. Because they can form little explosive crystals sometimes if they sit too long. And environmental, non-mandatory, thankfully, but that one's pretty straightforward. Those are what's going to be showing up in the new standard. And I know this just shows up pretty fuzzy up there, but this is another example of a label that you might have. The name's there, the danger is there, the signal, the hazard statement, just a couple. Fatal if swallowed, causes severe skin burns and eye damage. And your precautionary statements, in this particular one, it says manufacturer, their emergency number, and see the SDS for more information. So that's all the required information. Just another straightforward example, and you've got an example of one of those. Again, I've mentioned, just to reinforce, secondary container labeling. If you have a 5-gallon bucket of something and you need to make your own personal container to use to carry around with you, if that never leaves me, if I use it up by the end of the day, technically I don't have to label it, but that's really just not a good idea, because at some time somebody's probably going to set something down and it's going to be an unknown. And those are very expensive to characterize and get rid of, and it's not a good thing to have unknown chemicals. So anything transferred has to be labeled unless you use it by the end of the shift, but I really think everything has to be labeled. Now here's what you have to have. Again, your common trade name, your appropriate warnings, any personal protective equipment that's required with a chemical, and the CAS number. There's something in your policy that talks about the HMIS labeling system, and that's been around for about 10 or 12 years now, but OSU Stillwater probably won't implement that or be paying too much attention to that. It's a certain little procedure called HMIS, but as long as your secondary containers have this information, you'll be good. And just retain that manufacturer's information. Now, I have to confess, I got this on a campus, and I won't say which one, but this is not an appropriate label. Although we probably all know what that is, it just doesn't meet the minimum requirements. The actual minimum requirements are the name and the hazards, which should probably say Windex irritant, but I cannot assume that's what it is for sure. So we had a talk. But that was something I really found that was not being used by a person. It was just sitting there. And don't ever, I know you know this, but don't ever use a food or drink container to store anything. Just not a good idea. That's led to problems more than can be counted. New safety data sheets. What I'd like to do is just reinforce those are going to have to be available to everybody, immediate access, and it should be available before someone has to start working with something. Right now, if you were to pull an MSDS on a certain product or a chemical, you get 5 different ones. They'll all look differently, but thankfully the new ones are going to be standardized. And what I'd like to do, again, I guess we should have put 2 warnings out there. One was bring your reading glasses, and the other one was bring a pencil to write with. But I did find an example, which really is a pretty good example of a 2-page safety data sheet. This does meet the requirements. There's a little bit of extra information on here, which hopefully will go away. But if we could, there's some things on this I want to point out to you. I know not all of you are going to use well-done, low VOC styrene rubber cement, but rubber cement is something you could buy and use at home. So this is a good idea to have, maybe just as a good example to go with you. I want to point out just a couple things really quickly. On the front page, section 1, it has the product and company information. You'll notice not only do they have an emergency number for transportation, but they also have a medical number, which is a good thing. Section 2 is where you're going to see most of these changes show up. The GHS classification is right there. Acute toxicity, 4. So not so much acute toxicity. 4 is the least. Skin irritation, 3. Yeah, a little bit more. Skin, no. It's not a skin sensitizer, but it's for eye category 2B. It's not 1, but it is 2, so it can cause some eye damage. I cannot tell you exactly how they determine 2B, because like I told you, those appendices were 20 and 30 pages long. But they are required to go through and label with numbers, so those are the numbers on there. Problem is, over there, right below that, you'll see your GHS label pictograms, which are flammable, and then the exclamation mark, which is irritant. But this is a fairly severe irritant to the eye, so they've got danger. The orange boxes, I hope those go away. There's HMIS and there's WHMIS. Well, WHIMS is a Canadian thing. And they also have their own little pictograms, but they're supposed to be coming in harmony, so I'm hoping those will go away. But your hazard statements are there on your left-hand side, and your precautionary statements are on your right. Now, I wanted to show you the CAS number in case you've never seen that. The primary ingredient in this is MEK, or methylethyl ketone. Fairly common chemical in a lot of household products. CAS number is listed right there, if you ever have to look anything up. Now, it's listed by weight, 54 to 71%, and it's for some reason variable. I want to mention to you about anything that's 1% or greater has to be listed if it's hazardous. If it's a carcinogen, it has to be 0.1% or greater to be listed. So carcinogens will be listed on here at less than 1%. 4 is first aid measures. 5 is firefighting. That is where you do see the, again, still the HMIS number that I mentioned about the special labeling system, which I hope goes away. And NFPA is listed on here as health 2, flammability 3, and reactivity 0. So, but health is 2 is a pretty low health hazard, But this is really important to you to know that it's a 2B for your eye, because if you ever splash this in your eyes, it could be a very serious hazard. 2B is a pretty bad eye hazard. I'd want to know that. And the NFPA tells me nothing. 6, accidental release. 7, handling and storage. This will tell you your exposure limits. Just one thing I want to mention about exposure limits is that OSHA sets airborne standards for chemicals called permissible exposure limits, or PELs. It's usually an 8-hour average over the 8-hour workday, and they'll set a number. For this particular one, the OSHA PEL is 200 parts per million. We could actually test the air if you worked with this chemical on a daily basis and make sure you were below 200 parts per million. So your PELs are going to be listed there. On the back, physical and chemical properties. Now, if something's an acid, you know it's an acid, then maybe you could check out the pH here to find out how strong it is or how flammable it is. 10 is required, stability and reactivity. 11, toxicology. That's where sometimes your animal data is in here. Sensitization says probably not. That rat data and the mouse data is here. Again, it's probably not a lot that you're going to go over on a day-to-day basis, but these sections are required, and then 16 kind of wraps it up. But I did want to point out to you those particular sections where the numbers are and the new information is going to be. So these are the required sections now that are going to start showing up. Has anybody seen any of the new SDSs start coming in yet? You've seen a few come in? Is it for your physical plant, chemicals specifically?
Mainly the custodial chemicals we use on a daily basis.
Okay. And I think some of the laboratory, Signal Aldrich and Fisher, I think they're starting to convert over. But we do have till 2016, so a few of these are showing up. Lots of information at OSHA.gov. I'm going to make this available to Evan to have. I don't know if you want to put it on an intranet or whatever you want to do, or just keep it in your files. I want to make sure I'll give you my flash drive and you could go download all this stuff. The purple book, that big book, is out there, and I have the links in the PowerPoint for that. Now, I do want to show you one thing really quickly. Household products database. I think this is important for all of us to know about, and some people may not be aware of it. Things you use in your home could be hazardous too, not just if you bring it up here to use at work. But I really like this database because some auto products could be extremely nasty, stainless steel cleaners and things like that. Inside the home, pesticides, home maintenance, pet care, arts and crafts are notorious, have been for having hazardous ingredients. Home office, like toners, and yes, toners at work should be included in your inventory, and your IT people, if they handle that, should probably have SDSs on the toners. But I really love this, so if you just Google household products database, I'm sure you'll be able to come up with that. So do you have any questions at this point? Whoops. Hello. Do you have any questions at this point? No. Don't be shy. Just no questions. Okay. Well, hopefully I've covered it all. I do want to go, this really is just kind of a check on me more than anything else. I do want to go over this very quickly. If we can start with the little, did everybody get a copy of the little quiz?
Is this quiz going to be on the final?
No, this is the,
Thinking it. I'm afraid to ask.
yeah. I won't be back to retest you. Maybe not till next year. Maybe not then. I don't know. All right. All right. This won't take long, I promise. If you have some kind of unique employee ID number, you can put this here if you like. You're welcome to look at your handouts to get these answers, but we will be ahead and be keeping these in the file for our reference. So, okay, everybody got a copy? Need anything to write with? Okay, let's go ahead then and start, and we'll go over these. I'm going to go ahead and ask you all the questions, so yell at me. Which of the following can be found on the SDS? Yeah, you got to read them all. D is in dog. All of the above. Hey, A's right, but it's not the best answer. You've had to deal with that, right? Yeah, I know. SDS stands for? Yeah, B as in boy, safety data sheet. Employee exposure report should be filled out only if you've had a serious injury or acute injury. All right. By law, you must receive HAZCOM training within 30 days of employment and at least annually. You're trying to confuse me. Okay, 5, any unattended chemical. Yeah, okay, this is a little tricky. Any unattended chemical must have a label identifying it with the name of the chemical and their hazard warning. For you all, this is
D.
D. You have to have 4 things. So the minimum requirement is this, but for you, by your policy, this is false. You have to have 4 things on your label. So false. Yeah. I've been using this all over the state. Some people don't have that extra requirement. Okay, now I know number 6 is going to maybe be I don't know, but if you have an answer to number 6, where are the safety data sheets for your department located? Will you please fill that in? Okay, we have got that determined? Okay, I really need to move along. Number 7, a little bit of reading there. Which of the following statements is false about the rights of the employees regarding safety data sheets? D is in dog, actually. Employees do have the right to not work with something. They can refuse, and I forgot to mention that, and I don't have it on the PowerPoint. But employees can refuse until they've been trained. They should have access to that before they train. So D is in dog. We don't have to cover every single one every year. 8, you have the right to review your written program. The NFPA Diamond can help you judge your potential health hazards. Okay, a 10, if you have yeah, NFPA is just if you're a fireman. Nobody's a fireman, right? Okay. Fire and EMS only on the Diamond. 10, if you have a question about chemicals in your workplace, who may you consult, A, B, C, or D? D is in dog, all of the above. However, you can get the information. Be sure to talk to your supervisor if you're an employee, though. Injuries and illnesses that happen at work should be reported. A. What is hazard communication and right to know? Very good, B. B is in boy. 13, how can you protect yourself against hazards at work? All of the above. See, that way you have to read all of them before you get to D. So D is in dog. Sometimes chemicals need to be transferred. What's the most important thing to remember about that? Yes, C, it has to be labeled appropriately, and with the 4 things you need here on campus especially. 14, sometimes chemicals, 15, SDSs are to be. D is in dog, available without barriers. 18, which is the following statements about HAZCOM is false? B is in boy. Which employees that are concerned about handling hazardous chemicals can what? For all those reasons, D, all of the above. Those are all reasons to be concerned. Okay, I know we haven't, you probably haven't, I don't know if you've gotten this filled out yet or not, but let's go ahead and match these up. You can use your cheat sheet that I gave you. The compressed gases, which letter is that? D is in dog. The skull and crossbones. I, acute toxicity. The corrosion? Okay. E is in everybody. The exploding bomb? Right, explosive. The flame? Okay, the flame with the O. G. The dead fish. And what the internal one? The guy with the pictogram on his chest. A, health hazard in the exclamation mark. Irritant, irritant, C. Put my glasses back on. Okay, any final questions? We have one announcement before you get out of here.
We do have one announcement. If you just leave your quizzes on the back table there where you signed in, that'd be great. And then Bethine Fonstock, Dr. Fonstock would like to make